Hey folks, Bob Tuskin here with two of my fellow featured speakers at the Free Your Mind Conference. We just had a great dinner. Myself, of course, and Jame Fetzer, Professor Fetzer, and Alfred Webre, Exopolitics extraordinaire, and so much more. We're going to have a discussion here. I'll be behind the camera. You'll hear my voice without a doubt. And Jim has a very direct discussion in mind, so we'll allow him to start it off with an opening statement, and then we'll continue from there. So we hope you enjoy the supplementary interviews that we'll be doing the entire Free Your Mind conference. I'll be speaking with all of the speakers on a number of levels, and without further ado, let's chat, gentlemen. So Jim, you wanted to talk about Barry Soetoro, or Barack Hussein Obama as he goes by these days, huh?
Well, during dinner, a conversation evolved between the three of us that began in part with the sequence in which I should discuss the topics I will be addressing on Friday, which include the assassination of JFK, the events of 9/11, the plane crash that took the life of Senator Paul Wellstone and gave control of the Senate to the Republicans, and the more recent events at Sandy Hook and at the Boston Marathon, where you, Bob, suggested that the order in which I should address them would be to begin with the Boston Marathon, then talk about Sandy Hook, then talk about 9/11 and Paul Wellstone, because 9/11 places the Wellstone case into perspective, and then, last but far from least, the assassination of JFK, because that appears to be the historical event that precipitated the decline of democracy in America, as even Jack Ruby observed after the assassination.
Rubenstein, let's call him by his proper name, right? Because it's a Jewish name. We'll get accused of covering up Jack Rubenstein's true identity. All right, I'll stop interrupting and being a joker. Go ahead.
And he even worked as an investigator for Richard Nixon when he was a congressman, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it is quite fascinating. It turns out to be a very tight group that was involved in the taking out JFK, though it had broad support from multiple elements. But the point is that you, Bob, were suggesting that to begin with these more recent events might be the way to go, not just because they are so timely, but also because, as you asked Alfred, did Alfred think that Obama might be our last president? When you stepped out to do a brief interview with your own show, given that you're here in Philadelphia, Alfred and I continued our discussion, and I asked his thoughts about resequencing my topics. And Alfred was by and large in agreement with you. He thought that the situation with the Boston Marathon and Sandy Hook are so disturbing and are part of a pattern of creating an all-powerful executive branch, where, of course, the Department of Homeland Security is the enforcement mechanism, and where he added further reflections, including that a New Hampshire legislator, a woman, has now published a piece in the Huffington Post suggesting that Obama was behind the Boston bombing. And I am impressed by what both of you have said here, and I would like Alfred to elaborate on his thoughts that I'm indeed going to reorganize the sequence in which I take up these issues and do what I can to explain how threatened democracy is in America, where each of these measures seems to undermine the Constitution in one new way or another. And whereas Alfred astutely observed, Mayor Bloomberg of New York has even suggested that we may have to take a whole new look at the Constitution. Alfred, it's a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, I mean, all of these are a frontal attack on the Bill of Rights, and I happen to have taught the Bill of Rights at the University of Texas, and I have been a civil liberties lawyer, and it's something that I've been acutely aware of and have followed very acutely. And it seems to me that with the lockdown at Boston, that may have been actually one of the primary intents of that false flag, which is to begin to either provoke a rebellion, a civilian rebellion here in the United States so that the Constitution is canceled, or by these measures, in effect, to chip away at and cancel the Bill of Rights. There have been, Sandy Hook was the 19th false flag event aimed at eroding the Second Amendment. There was even a Sandy Hook in the Port Arthur false flag in Australia in 1995.
Right, and that's when they took all the guns away from them. And that only led to further crime and more violent crimes, and we saw that was a colossal failure.
Yeah. Now, what came to me in the pressure cooker, and I'll be very brief in this, of the Boston Marathon days from April 15th to April 19th.
Not the pressure cooker bomb, but the pressure cooker of the event.
No pun intended about
right.
about the pressure cooker.
Yeah.
Was that a realization that the capstone of these pyramidal events, these false flag events, is an entity, a Manchurian candidate known as, quote, Barack Hussein Obama. There is no entity on the planet whose real name, whose legal name is Barack Hussein Obama. The entity that occupies the White House changed his name on October 14th, 1982. We have the raised seal document in a Skumchek, BC court from Barik Munir Ubaid, which was his CIA operative name, to Barack Hussein Obama on orders from his CIA handler at that time, because Barack Hussein Obama Sr. had already been assassinated and could tell no tales as to how the legend of Barack Hussein Obama had been constructed. What I've noted is that if we go to Boston Marathon, if we go to Sandy Hook, the capstone event, the benediction in each of these false flags is always delivered by the Obama, who comes in and says, I feel your pain, things are going to be fine, and our baseball team is going to be great.
And tonight you labeled that as the ultimate deceiver, right?
Yes. This is the archetype of the deceiver. In the 1970s, when I was a futurist at Stanford Research Institute, we analyzed a phenomenon called friendly fascism that was going to be the political system of the United States at this time, which is eventuating now. Barack Hussein Obama, this Manchurian candidate, is to friendly fascism what Adolf Hitler was to Nazism, the kind of hard bootjack Nazism of the Third Reich.
Jim, do you see the similarities with that?
Oh, absolutely, I do. I mean, 9/11 is the parallel to the Reichstag fire.
Sure.
And the passing of the Enabling Act parallel to the Patriot Act, which appears to have been modeled upon it. And it really is stunning to look back upon the relatively brief public history of Obama, because as a candidate, I thought he was perfect. He had a background in the law. He'd even taught constitutional law. He was intelligent, handsome, charismatic, and black, all tremendously positive virtues from the point of view of the left in this country, where I was a very enthusiastic supporter and believed at that time he was precisely the right person to place our country back on a firm constitutional footing. I was therefore profoundly disillusioned when he did not move to repeal the Patriot Act, to rescind the Military Commissions Act, to close Guantanamo, to shut down these wars. Not only did he do none of those things, but he went further by signing the National Defense Appropriations Act for 2012. And I am now relatively convinced by the enhancements of the Department of Homeland Security, the way in which it has beefed itself up in an apparent preparation for conducting a massive war against the American people, obtaining 1.5 billion 40 caliber hollow point bullets, which aren't even permissible in combat under the Hague Convention of 1899, acquiring 2,700 of these light tanks that are specifically designed to withstand improvised explosive devices, 7,000 assault weapons. Special preparations have been made with mortuaries and funeral homes to take an excess of cadavers should they overwhelm hospitals for an unspecified disaster, which cannot be because of foreign entanglement, since the Department of Homeland Security has nothing to do with foreign involvement, and where there is no perceivable natural disaster that could bring about such an extraordinary necessity, but must be something that Homeland Security anticipates is going to arrive, where there's massive dissatisfaction and an uprising by the American people, which could occur under several different scenarios as I see it. One is a Cyprus-type scam where they take 40 to 60% of the savings of the American people from banks which have benefited so massively from infusions of public funds, or when they come to take our guns, where, as I have observed in the past, when they come to take our guns, the time has come to use them. But where Sandy Hook specifically appears to have been designed to create a tremendous wave of emotional response, where a mass of Americans ignored the fact that our greatest bulwark of defense against tyranny by our own government is 100 million armed Americans. And I'll not forget how on the very day of the Boston Marathon bombing, Obama appeared after the Senate had defeated the last of the multiple proposals for gun control, extremely agitated that it had failed.
And did he not, sorry to interrupt, but did he not sign several executive orders on the topic of gun control? And, this is the same guy, to talk about the hypocrisy here, this is the same guy who said he wouldn't do as many executive orders as his predecessor, so on and so forth.
Well, it's all completely outrageous because the Second Amendment is very clear and unmistakable, just as the house-to-house searches being conducted in Boston during the lockdown was such an obvious violation against unreasonable search and seizure, just as the presence of a military force occupying Boston, as it were, is a blatant display of the violation of posse comitatus, whereas Alfred has astutely observed that may be one of the principal objectives. Not only that, but to conceal a report that was published on Tuesday that reflected 577 pages demonstrating that the Bush-Cheney administration and the Obama-Biden administration have resorted to torture, and that this was an extraordinary development where it was being discussed openly at the highest levels of the American government. And indeed, as well, they have passed an internet cyber security bill that threatens us intellectually, where the great merit of the Boston bombing has been the unbelievably brilliant performance of the alternative media in dissecting the false story being propagated by the local police and even our own FBI, Bob. I mean,
it's been really easy for us to do so, and I wonder sometimes if they knew that that would be the case, if they anticipated that a certain percentage of us would see right through their lies, and that they feed into that dichotomy being created. Now, with all the aforementioned that Jim just painted for us, of this very scary picture of the government getting ready for some sort of event, Alfred, what do you predict that event may or may not be? And I don't like predictions, so maybe I should rephrase that. Where do you see this all going?
Well, that's a good question. I just completed a 10,000 word article that I hoped brings out some solutions that we as citizens can begin to take. The first thing that I come to is another lawyer named Mahatma Gandhi, who faced similar challenges when his country was occupied by an imperial power, in the same way that the United States of America is occupied by the New World Order, which is an alien imperial power at this time. And beginning to educate people in concepts of passive resistance and getting out in the streets, using the example of the South American housewives who go out with pots and pans and start, the whole movement of, I know that you've are bringing out this paper, but I can remember in the 70s when we began first having the whole death from AIDS, silence equals death, act up. And citizens, again, taking hold of the body politic and beginning to revive it. And look at what happened at Tiananmen Square. Where was the last Tiananmen Square in America? Why did no one in Boston stand up and said, this is a pack of shit? Excuse my language.
No, that's fine.
Okay?
Because that's what it is.
No. I mean, why did no one in Boston say, this is a charade? I don't understand it.
People have, but you would think...
But they're in Boston.
I'm sure people have, but they're outshadowed by the voices we hear from the lamestream media. Now, we're going to pause for a second, gentlemen, because we hear somebody else coming in.
Yeah.
All right, so we were talking about how no one in Boston seemingly was outraged by this and came out publicly to speak about it. Now, I have a feeling there are people that we didn't hear about who follow our work and whatnot. But Jim, you wanted to pick it up from that point?
Well, I think that there are signs that this event is going to be used to crack down on various groups, anyone who does research on conspiracies, the so-called conspiracy theorists, even though I believe a more apt term is conspiracy realist.
Right.
The fact that the internet was the source of the information they used to construct their bombs purportedly. And I believe we're given a very elaborate story here to fill in all these details that are fabricated by the FBI and DHS to try to cement in the minds of the public that these guys were really those who perpetrated these deeds, even though there's an enormous amount of evidence that's been unearthed that they were not, including even photographs of the younger brother wearing a backpack slung over his right shoulder.
After the explosion.
Which is, well, in this case before, but it's silver. It's of a different design and color than the two backpacks that were the source for the explosions. And we do have other photographs seeing him depart where he may very well be wearing that same backpack. We've been told that they hijacked an SUV, but in fact it actually belonged to the older brother. He has a wife, he has a daughter, he was a boxer. The younger brother was a wrestler. He was active in the drama club. He went back to college. He was hanging with his buds. They weren't at all acting like terrorists. Plus, there's a subliminal subtext here of drawing an implicit comparison with Lee Oswald. who no more committed the assassination of JFK than did the brothers commit the Boston bombings, including that Oswald had just returned from Russia, and that on the day of the assassination, he was alleged to have shot a police officer, J.D. Tippit, and that was supposed to be a reason for believing that he had shot the president, even though it's a non sequitur. And here in this case, the older brother had returned from Russia, and the younger is alleged to have shot a security guard at MIT, and these are supposed to be reasons for believing that they were the Boston terrorists. We have photographs of men in military uniforms, military-like uniforms, dark jackets, khaki pants, and a distinctive cap with a skull design for Kraft International, which is a private international mercenary firm. They're on cell phones. They are paying no attention to the marathon. They appear to have been involved here. A private investigator studying this case has observed that the window of a door front was blown out, not blown in. And we have photographs of the faking of an amputee who had already lost his legs in Afghanistan. I mean, what was going on here was, as Alfred put it, an elaborate charade. And it is shocking that no one from Boston has spoken out about it, and that we have other high officials, such as the mayor of New York City now, calling for a reconsideration of the Constitution, where I think the points that Alfred has been making about this are impeccable.
Well, the Constitution gives us the right to drink large soft drinks, right? And to, what other crazy things is Bloomberg trying to do? Geez, don't get started on the nanny state governor, or mayor rather. We could go on and on about what he's doing. And of course, he's an example of the tyranny we face in general, of that sort of attitude of the government trying to tell us what to do, and if we don't agree with them or if we don't follow their rules, they put us in a cage. That's how they operate. Or they frame these patsies. Alfred, what do you think this is? What do you think, to revert back to the question I had asked you before, where do you think this is all going? What's the next play?
It is obvious that the national security state has a game plan.
Right.
I mean, to go out and order large quantities of bullets to buy up the market in the gunpowder, to make all of these arrangements for caskets and for large numbers of dead bodies, implies that they do have a game plan which is sinister, and the attack appears to be on the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. It appears to be on the young, the ill, the infirm, the old, the weak, and so that there is a game plan. That's for sure. And the issue is, how do we as citizens respond? And I think that it's time now for us to take responsibility for the body politic. Take responsibility for the shape of the body politic. Take responsibility for calling out false flags. Take responsibility for calling out the President of the United States as illegitimate, as having been elected by the use of environmental war, namely HARP. There's all of these points which can be made, and that people have to begin to make themselves visible on the streets. The way that in Eastern Europe a change was able to be made, and you can say, well, perhaps those were manipulated events also, is that people were on the streets through Twitter. It's time for an American spring. It's time for an American spring.
Yeah.
It is really time for an American spring.
Jim, do you see this happening? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you short, but
Well, I think that the moment of crystal clarity that should have dawned on every American was when they had this absurd FBI press conference and their designated stooge explains they wanted the public to focus on only their photographs, as though they had done an exhaustive analysis of this vast number of photographs that had taken during this event because of cell phones and cameras and all the like, where the alternative media had already identified the perps. They were these Kraft International operatives under the control of DHS who are promoting this for a multiplicity of reasons. Now, if you stop and juxtapose the following two items of information, you'll appreciate how far we have descended into the unreality of fabricated events, where Karl Rove made famous the notion that we create our own reality, and then you have to try to catch up with us as we create another new reality. On the one hand, we have a subcommittee of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Intelligence, which released a report on October 3rd based upon a study of 680 fusion center reports accumulated during 2009 and 2010, where fusion centers merged together federal, state, and local anti-terrorism efforts. In those 680 reports, the amount of terrorist activity and terrorists in the United States that they discovered was none, zero, zilch, nada.
well, that's because the
nothing.
TSA caught them all at the airports, right?
Juxtapose that now with the report in Mother Jones that the FBI, the series of terrorist attacks have been reported by the FBI in which the FBI was involved in every single one of them.
The underwear bombing, they've set them all up. But Jim, what about the revolution that Alfred's saying it's time for? Do you think we'll actually see people take it to the streets?
We're going to have to do something or just call it a day, because the term sheeple is becoming more and more applicable to the American public as a whole. I'm very relieved that all of those gun control measures were defeated. The last, of course, was for universal background checks, where one of the most telling billboards that appeared in relation to that was, they were all for background checks. Let's start with you, Mr. President.
Yeah, well, we got a background check. It was a forged document that claimed he was born in Hawaii, and as Alfred pointed out, that was all manufactured from the get-go.
Well, it's much more elaborate than that, of course, because one of the most disillusioning to me events in the whole administration is that among his very first acts, if not the first, was to classify all of his college and school and educational records. That's simply absurd. You got a man who's president of the United States and he won't let anyone see how he did in junior high school. And of course the reason is because he had received various forms of support by virtue of being a citizen of another nation, in this case Indonesia. So he qualified for scholarships because he was a foreign student. But of course that implied in turn he was not a natural born American citizen and therefore was not entitled to run as a candidate for president of the United States. What we find once again, it appears, the American people have been subjected to a very sophisticated con job, where you can't excuse the highest political leaders of our two major parties who allowed this to happen.
And Alfred, you consider Obama to be the ultimate con at the moment, huh?
He is in the archetype of the arch deceiver. He says that he's concerned about global warming, and yet his office and his departments, the Department of Energy, the Coast Guard, were intimately involved in exacerbating the BP Gulf oil spill false flag operation to destroy the Gulf. The Fukushima HAARP false flag event that was a global radiation event to spew radiation throughout the northern hemisphere. There have been 100,000 excess deaths in the United States alone in 2011, according to Center for Disease Control data, peer-reviewed data. And Obama and his Department of Energy were covertly coordinating this, along with the international apparatus that runs HARP. So that the man is involved in ecocide and the man is involved in genocide while presenting a green image. That is the truth of this entity that's in the White House. It's unspeakable evil.
And additional motives for the Boston bombing appear to have included that it created a distraction from the fact that the Department of Defense is now sending some of the most sophisticated Air Force equipment in the world to Israel, including refueling tankers that could enable the Israelis to attack Iran, which would have the most catastrophic consequences. I would compare this to putting a pedophile in charge of a daycare center. This is completely insane. The estimates have it that an attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities would bring about the deaths of 1 million Iranians immediately, and as the cloud of pollution passes over Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, another 35 million premature deaths. This must not happen.
Yeah.
The American people must do something to stop it. If we care about our country, the time has come to do something about it.
I think that at the end of the day is what people can take away from this talk. You know, there's a million different angles we can take in looking at what's going on and the problems we face, but ultimately we all come to the same conclusions. We are mad as hell, we're not going to take it, and we have to do something about it. So can we agree that that's the bottom line, gentlemen?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there are multiple avenues. For example, there are multiple grounds under which a bill of impeachment can be taken out. A criminal bill of impeachment for crimes, not for exceeding executive authority, but for
there was
crimes.
a push from a few senators on that front. Charlie Rangel even was amongst them. I don't know where it went, but
right, for fraud.
For fraud, but not
For fraud.
not for his treason, his crimes.
Yeah. This is for criminal fraud against the federal government, for fraud in the use of Fulbright funds, on down. Okay.
But this is just one person. Barry Soetoro, Barack Obama, whatever the hell is.
Adolf Hitler was just one person.
Sure. But in my opinion, I see him more as just, and I agree that he has sinister motives, but I see him as a suit. And I see this culture that has been here on this planet for thousands of years as the real culprit in all of this.
This member of the New Hampshire House of Legislature is just one woman, but she has now publicly stated her opinion that the Boston Marathon bombing was the work of the Department of Homeland Security and the Obama administration to benefit it politically. Maybe there's a chance that this idea is sinking into the consciousness of the American people, which in my judgment is the one key element to transforming the situation we are in.
You see, one of Obama's deflections is, I'm just a suit.
So he uses that.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen.
And so, what are we to do? He's just a suit. If only the Führer knew.
All right, well, this has been a fascinating talk. I'm sure the viewers are going to enjoy this thoroughly, as they will seeing your individual talks at the conference. Jim will be discussing much of what he brought up today and so much more. Alfred's got a fascinating talk to definitely look forward to. And we'll continue these supplementary interviews as we go throughout the conference with myself and folks like Jim and Alfred and all the other great speakers that will be here. So gentlemen, I think this was productive. I think the viewers can come away from this with some insight on what's going on and also some, motivation to take action. So thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.